Okay, so I guess this is my attempt to go over like a bunch of these things I've seen just across these discussions. So Nazi is like, oh, Ukraine has a bunch of Nazis. It's controlled by the Nazis and needs regime change. Look at the actual ruling party in Ukraine, the Servant of the People Party. They are a big tent liberal centrists, not Nazis. The party didn't even exist until 2018, and then Zelensky was voted into office on in 2019. Again, look at the makeup of the parliament of the Verkhovna Rada. They're not Nazis. Again, Servant of the People Party is big tent liberal centrists. Every country has dumbasses, has ethno-nationalists, white supremacists, etc. You can't really say like, oh, Russia needs to invade Ukraine in order to destroy a single brigade-sized formation out of the dozens and dozens of brigades that makes up the Ukrainian military. Okay, just negotiate peace. Okay, how do you actually get both sides to stop fighting and come to the negotiating table? What conditions and concessions do you think both sides will agree to actually bring about peace? Put everything on paper. And how do you prevent a conflict from just flaring up again in the future? How do you prevent or deter Russia from simply attacking again in the future, this time starting even further west? If you have no plan as to actually how to attain peace and keep the peace, and you don't care what the peace looks like as long as things are quiet rather than peaceful, then calling for negotiations and peace is meaningless. A bad peace just sets up the next war. I don't want just a ceasefire. I don't want just a frozen conflict. I want peace. An ironclad, lasting, and just peace. Stop spending money there and spend money here at home. Yeah, why don't we have those expanded or new social programs? Because of conservatives, because of free market advocates, because of the Republicans. If a bill were put to Congress tomorrow to feed the hungry and house the homeless, the Republicans would vote it down. They would vote against it 90. They would vote against it 95-5. Ukraine is not in the way of new or expanded social welfare programs. There's simply no political will in the United States to vote for it. We weren't trying to solve these problems before the 22 invasion, and we're not going to start after the war is over. $125 billion. That's quite. If you don't have like the context of such a number, that does seem like a quite a lot relative to the GDP of the United States. The United States has committed something like 0.25%, 1/4 of 1% of GDP towards helping the Ukrainians. That's really not a drain on society, especially like compared to other countries like Estonia, who have contributed about 3% of GDP towards helping Ukraine. A lot of that 125 billion is not in cash, but the dollar value of materiel support that is often overvalued at the original production price, the production price of an M113 produced in the 1970s, and not the current depreciated, aged, worn out price or value that it would be today. Okay, Europe needs to step up. They have. If you look at a chart of countries' contributions to helping Ukraine as a percentage of GDP, the Europeans are absolutely putting in more effort than the United States is. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Denmark, and more know of the threat that Russia poses. All of them have been dominated by Russia in some regard, either as part of the Soviet Union or as a puppet state of the Soviet Union in the Warsaw Pact. They know of the threat. They don't want Russia to come like bashing down their doors trying to claim them back. So they are putting in a lot more effort than the United States is relative to their size. The Europeans have also been the first mover, that is, the first to provide tanks and tanks, cruise missiles, and jet aircraft. I think the Europeans are putting up 60 F-16 fighter bombers. The U.S. hasn't offered up any aircraft. The Europeans have sent hundreds of tanks. I think like at this point it might be up to 1,000 tanks. The U.S. has sent 31. That is 1 battalion's worth of tanks. Let's see, why are we defending Ukraine's borders and not our own? Defending our allies and our own borders are not mutually exclusive. The violations of border sovereignty between Ukraine and the United States with the waves of migrants are very different. Ukraine is facing a hostile foreign invasion of professional, trained, mechanized, and armored forces by a foreign nation state. The United States is facing waves of poor migrants trying to get into the United States for jobs, for work, etc. These two problems do not draw from the same resource pools unless you think that the United States should be deploying warplanes and heavy mechanized and armored forces to fight, I don't know, civilians with sleeping bags at the Mexican border. Right, the part about Hawaii, that's like way outdated, but yeah, the $700 was intended for tiding people over until more comprehensive aid could be organized. It's not because of Ukraine. The idea that Russia will use nuclear weapons over Western aid. Okay, if you believe that Russia is willing to kill themselves by starting a nuclear war over not getting to have their way in Ukraine, then you must believe that the Russians are insane, that they are suicidally mad, and that they cannot be trusted, negotiated, or reasoned with anyway. It is like trying to negotiate with someone who is wearing a suicide vest and is and is like threatening to set it off if they don't get to have their way with like someone they're holding. You cannot negotiate with such a person, even if peace were to be established. That person, that country is now a rogue state, an irrational actor, and you cannot go back to business as usual. So, right, also, do you believe that Russia gets to just do whatever they want without provoking the West? That Iran, China, North Korea can give Russia ballistic missiles, training, and other weapons and supplies without provoking the West, but the West has to provoke Russia destroying the world if we help the Ukrainians too much? Kind of a double standard. The war is bad, so Ukraine needs to stop resisting, but the Russians don't need to stop attacking. How are you supposed to deter aggression, deter imperialism, if the only response to aggression is immediate concession, appeasement, do not resist? Why is the responsibility for ending the war on the Ukrainians to give up 20% of their country to Russian occupation, but it's not on the Russians to pull out? Yeah, just aggressive wars of territorial conquest. They should have cost in order to be deterred. I'm not one of those believers in do not resist, just get conquered, but then do civil disobedience. No, they're just going to brutalize the population into being quiet and compliant. That conscription and wartime measures are bad, so Ukraine needs to stop. Right? conscription, wartime measures, emergency powers, these are very commonplace for a nation state at war. Ukraine is fighting an existential conflict as they have been invaded by Russia, who is trying to seize territory from them. Russia claims to have annexed 20% of Ukraine, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kherson oblasts. Right, again, these emergency measures are commonplace for a nation state at war. These are not a unique fault of Ukraine. That this is enriching the military-industrial complex. Okay, we need to be able to morally differentiate between buying a weapon to defend oneself from being attacked, as the Ukrainians are, and buying a weapon to attack someone else with. If you are a supporter of the Second Amendment in the United States, the right for the personal ownership of firearms, you don't care about like enriching weapons manufacturers. At least not in that regard, because you are able to differentiate someone buying a weapon to defend themselves and those they love, and as well as a nation state defending itself from foreign invasion. The idea that we should like spitefully not resist invasion in order to prevent giving money to arms manufacturers is very bad policy making. Okay, moving on. That the money is just being used for money laundering. You don't know what money laundering is. Even if you're worried about embezzlement, the aid is being tracked and monitored much more closely than say in Iraq or Afghanistan. The Office of the Inspector General is working on it. The Ukrainians have published published videos and documents talking about how they monitor and track the aid that has been provided to them. There was once this video, not a video, but like a story of like a javelin in the hands, a javelin in the hands of like a South American, Central American cartel. The story was like debunked almost immediately. It wasn't a javelin, it was an AT-4, which was a cheap single-shot disposable rocket launcher. Several South American militaries use the AT-4, so it most likely came from one of them, and the markings on the weapon marked it out as an inert training tube that cannot fire live ammunition. Okay. That the West instigated the conflict as a proxy war in overthrowing Yanukovych. So I don't care about the controversy and conspiracy theories surrounding the nature of Euromaidan, as well as the whether or not the United States instigated the revolution or had some hand in removing Yanukovych. The Rada, the parliament, was not changed by Euromaidan. The same politicians from before Euromaidan, including Yanukovych's own party, voted to remove Yanukovych and voted for his replacement, Yatsenyuk, as prime minister after Euromaidan. That Russia has been the instigator of like the cross-border violence the whole time. They're the ones that invaded Crimea, invaded Donbass, propped up the breakaway states, and kept the civil war going. Russia could have simply not done those things, and nothing would have happened to Russia. That it's not in America's interest because it's all the way over there. So our China, North Korea, Iran, Argentina has also taken an interest, and others also like fools and like doing things wrong for having an interest in things happening in Europe. Are they all fools for looking outward, seeking allies, partners, etc.? Because we live in a globally interconnected world. Things that happen on one end of the world have ripple effects and implications for other parts of the world. within weeks of the full-scale Russian invasion, there were Ukrainian refugees trying to get into the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border. That's how interconnected the world is. Ukraine is also one of the world's largest grain producers. Russia has been trying to strangle Ukraine's ability to export grain and other food products, which leads to exacerbated food insecurity in the Middle East and Africa, which drives more waves of migrants to to Europe and the United States, which in turn provokes sentiments, promotes like xenophobic, nationalist, isolationist sentiments against these waves of foreign migrants, and which then affects how people vote. Ukraine, resisting or stopping Russia's expansionist ambitions now will be a lot cheaper than the US and the rest of Europe having to fortify Eastern Europe against Russian imperialism and expansionism should the Russians just be allowed to steamroll the Ukrainians. Again, imperialism should be deterred and have cost. The idea that Russia needs buffer states against NATO, so NATO cannot attack Russia. NATO cannot invade Russia. Russia is a nuclear state, and I do not believe that Western leaders are either ignorant of or dismissive of Russia's nuclear arsenal. NATO is also in no position to actually invade Russia. The Western military-industrial bases have been atrophying since the end of the Cold War. Some countries have pitiful abilities to actually manufacture military equipment for themselves during peacetime, let alone support an army for invading Russia. Right. Countries also have to ask to join NATO. NATO has not been creeping towards Russia, but countries that have been dominated by Russia want to join NATO because they are afraid of a revanchist Russia trying to drag them back into Russia's sphere, kicking and screaming, like the Russians are trying to do with Ukraine right now. Russia has also said that Sweden and Finland joining NATO was not a problem and that they were okay with it. So which is it? Is Russia invading Ukraine to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO because NATO expansionism is an existential threat, or is NATO expansionism on the Russian border not a big deal in the case of Finland and Sweden? Then it also denies the autonomy and sovereignty of countries that want to join NATO. That I do not believe that Russia has veto power as to who is allowed to join NATO. I think countries that were once dominated by Russia have the right as sovereign nation states to petition to join NATO, and Russia does not have the right to say no, you are not allowed to join, to ask to join NATO. Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, etc. Okay, biolabs and weapons of mass destruction. It's been 2 years and no weaponized biolabs nor weapons of mass destruction have been discovered. There's a constant conflation between biolabs and bioweapon labs. Every industrial country in the world has biomedical research facilities because, biomedical research is a good thing to do, it's a good thing to have. Medicine needs to keep up with the rapid evolution of pathogens. And again, there's been no evidence provided of bioweapon labs. Also, do you really want to normalize and justify invading other countries based on accusations that they are developing weapons of mass destruction? Picture of George W. Bush's smiling face slowly fading in. That Ukraine is corrupt and has social problems, therefore they should just be left to be conquered by Russia. Again, stupid. Their problems in social issues and government corruption will not be solved or improved by inducing the collapse of their nation state and a foreign military occupation by Russia. The world should have multipolarity in terms of in terms of mutually beneficial organizations like trade deals, sure, but having multipolarity in like imperial military dominance, no, that can only harbinger violence and very bad things. That the West is bad, therefore no one in the West should do any good things. Like when the opportunity presents itself, like helping a smaller country defend itself from an imperialist invasion from a larger nuclear country. Again, that's bad. Bad people can, bad people, countries, groups can still do good things occasionally. And again, I think Russia is worse. Let's see, I don't care what flags fly over Donbass. Right, so this isn't about Donbass anymore. Russia has claimed to annex 20% of Ukraine, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, despite not even controlling Zaporizhia or Kherson cities. They've launched a war of territorial imperial conquest, trying to rebuild an imperial sphere of influence. This has far greater consequences and implications than just two cities in eastern Ukraine. Imperialism should be resisted. The West scuttled the early peace deals. Again, no one has ever presented supposedly half signed, agreed upon documents for peace deals. The West cannot stop Ukraine from, say, surrendering or coming to the negotiating table. They cannot stop Zelensky or the Verkhovna Rada from issuing an order to, say, have the military stand down or say, okay, fine, we give up, you can have it. The West cannot force the Ukrainians to keep fighting. I'm against being against both sides. I'm not entirely sure what I was even going on about with that. That who cares about the nation state and borders? It is the people who are suffering. Yeah, that's true. So the invasion by the Russians, which wants to annex their land, annex their land, eliminate their national identity, denies their existence as an independent people, wants to wipe out their language, subjugate them, and brutalize them as new subjects of a resurgent Russian empire. That should be resisted, right? I think so. Let's see. 8 years bombing Donbass, right? The Ukrainians bombing Donbass. So, I guess I'll just go over this. That 90% of the civilian casualties occurred within the first year, while the front lines were still fluid and civilians had yet to flee the area. The 14,000 dead figure counts both military and civilian casualties for the Ukrainians, Russians, and people and separatists in Donbass. Between 2016 and 2017 combined, there were only 235 civilian casualties, and from 2019 to 2021, there were only 1 to 3 civilian casualties on average per month. This is not indicative of genocide or ethnic cleansing. Right then, the invasion itself has killed tens of thousands of civilians and displaced many millions. The Russian annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk has now wiped any pretext of liberating Donbass as an independent country from Ukraine, because even if Russia wins, they will not be independent. They will simply be part of Russia now. Again, okay, I think the laundry list of Western atrocities. Again, West bad, Russia worse. That Russia is actually fighting an anti-imperialist war, despite, again, just listen to what the Russians say, watch Russian media, especially channels like Russia Media Monitor just rebroadcasts translated Russian media into English for Western audiences. The Russians are constantly constantly proclaiming that, right, they are rebuilding the Russian Empire. They want a new empire. Russia is an eternal empire, can only exist as an empire. That they deny the independence and existence of other people. That you know, accept that you are Russian or perish. That, yeah, again, it's just unambiguous, and it's straight from the horse's mouth. Okay, I think that's it. All right.